Sister-in-law starved her baby to maintain her breastfeeding facade, and now I'm blamed for confronting her dangerous delusion. My sister-in-law Julia gave birth to little Amanda just 11 weeks ago, and from the very start, something felt off. Amanda never seemed to grow, mostly losing weight instead of gaining any, and watching the numbers drop was terrifying. In my country, there's a huge social pressure to breastfeed, and Julia embraced that fully. She was adamant that she wanted to do everything by the book, breast exclusively for as long as she could. As weeks went by and Amanda kept dropping down the weight chart, eventually landing in the 0.1 percentile, Julia's behavior changed. She suddenly forbade my mom and me from visiting, insisting we'd poison her if we so much as brought food into her home. This blindsided me, especially since Julia and I had been close friends before Amanda was born. All I had left were the pictures and videos my brother sent us. Only once, my mom broke the silence and nervously admitted she was worried about Amanda. In a video, Amanda was crying, writhing, and shoving her fists into her mouth, classic hunger cues, while Julia's voice narrated how this is what a happy, full baby looks like. My mom gently asked if Julia would consider giving Amanda a bottle, but Julia went ballistic, cut us off completely, and slammed the door on any contact. Julia claimed she pumped constantly, but her milk supply never increased. Amanda's tongue tie was clipped, but nothing improved. Julia refused formula, resorting instead to donor milk and painstakingly topping up Amanda's feeds through some strange tube, though even with those efforts, Amanda's growth didn't catch up. Every week, they trudged to the doctor's office to check Amanda's weight, but the numbers barely budged. Then everything exploded. Yesterday changed everything. My brother called us crying. Amanda was in the hospital. The story spilled out in choked fragments. As usual, before their doctor's appointment, Julia sent my brother off to fetch her coffee while she took Amanda into the nursing room. But this time, a nurse popped in during the middle of it to talk about paperwork, and what the nurse saw sent everything tumbling down. Julia was feeding Amanda from a bottle right before Amanda was supposed to be weighed, against explicit medical instructions. The bottle? Packed with 150 cc of milk, already half emptied. The nurse immediately protested, saying the feeding should happen after the weigh-in. That's when my brother walked in, and saw the bottle. He lost it. He'd spent weeks watching Julia refuse to give Amanda bottles at home, refusing formula or any supplementation, and suddenly here she was sneaking milk before appointments. Before anyone could process it, Amanda vomited, thick white milk spewing everywhere. It looked so abnormal and terrifying that the nurse checked the bottle. Mixed into the milk was rice cereal. The chaos escalated instantly. The doctor rushed in, took one look at the situation, and ordered Amanda to be transferred by ambulance for emergency evaluation. Julia lost her grip, throwing things, screaming that she would feed her baby however she wanted, whenever she wanted. My family rushed to the hospital, hearts racing. Amanda's blood work painted a horrifying picture: kidney and liver dysfunction, abnormally low vitamins and iron. We were told Amanda had been starving. The doctor wanted to know why no one in Amanda's family had intervened sooner. All we could do was explain the wall Julia built, that we'd been shut out, accused of plotting to hurt Amanda. That's when things got stranger. The doctors demanded Julia undergo a psychiatric evaluation for postpartum depression. She panicked, and then, in her terror that Amanda would be taken away, she admitted to something outlandish. A friend told her that if she faked postpartum depression, everyone would back off, and she'd finally have peace to breastfeed as she pleased. The doctors explained to her just how dangerous what she was doing was, pointing out the cereal in the bottle and how it risked Amanda's life just so she could pretend Amanda was gaining weight. When confronted with the truth, that Amanda desperately needed formula to survive, Julia's defiance only hardened. She screamed that she'd rather starve Amanda than give her formula, that only she had the right to decide how Amanda was fed, and no one else. It was then that the doctors gave Julia a choice: cooperate for extended psych evaluation or the police would be notified. So, they locked her in the ward for a week. All this time, my brother has worked himself to the bone, 14-hour days, because after their wedding, Julia demanded a traditional marriage. He'd convinced himself Julia must know what was best, but this time, the mask dropped. My brother was livid. He told us that Julia had knowingly starved Amanda to maintain her illusion, all while he pulled overtime to make sure Amanda would never want for formula if needed. He said he wanted a divorce and full custody. Now, whether he'll actually get that is uncertain. Courts rarely side with fathers, especially for care of a little girl. The doctors, meanwhile, were furious at my brother for failing to notice the warning signs. Before Julia was admitted to the psych ward, my frustration boiled over. I told her she'd turned us into monsters in her mind, when all we'd ever tried to do was help her and Amanda. I told her this was always about her own breastfeeding journey, never Amanda's life. She called me a BTCH and spat that I should have died in childhood, because no one could ever love an autistic person like me. Now, the doctors are saying Julia may have schizophrenia or some severe mania or psychosis, but if the evaluation comes back clean, there's a real chance she may lose Amanda for good. I know from experience with abused and neglected children that the belief mommy always knows best can sometimes be not just wrong, but deadly. All I wanted was for Amanda to survive and thrive. Now everything is hanging by a thread. Update 1. First of all, our little Amanda is doing well and remains in the hospital. She's being fed with formula and bottles. My brother had to finally agree to this, and just since yesterday she's gained 30 grams. More tests have been run, and now we're anxiously waiting for the results. The doctors are concerned because Julia, my sister-in-law, was force-feeding Amanda cereal mixed with donor milk before any of the appointments, and apparently, this can cause problems with the digestive system later on. No one knows how long she had been doing it, and she won't admit to the duration. Me and my mum are having a hard time forgiving ourselves. We realize that we let Amanda down and put her in danger, and that knowledge sits heavy with us. There are people questioning what happened, especially since, up until recently, we believe Julia was feeding Amanda well and doing everything to provide milk for her. That's genuinely what we thought at the time. We never realized that Julia had decided it's breast milk or nothing at all until she finally admitted it to the doctors. My brother, Michael, has taken vacation from work and spends almost all his time now with Amanda. He's moving in with us soon. Before all this, he worked constantly, sometimes even doing overtime off the books, and he's just exhausted, but he tells us he felt like he had no other choice. He promises he'll do everything possible to be a good father from now on. There's still no word from Julia. We worry for her no matter what, she's still our family. She doesn't have her own family. Before the wedding, she told us she and her family had a huge falling out, and they cut her off, so we've always felt this extra responsibility for her, because to us she's alone in this world. We finally got in touch with one of Julia's friends, Linda. Linda had been donating milk to her and was horrified when she heard Amanda's story. She admitted that she was the one who told Julia to pretend she was afraid we would poison her, all because Linda's mother-in-law had been demanding to visit after Amanda was born, and Linda needed an excuse to get people to leave her alone. Shockingly, Linda also told us that before giving birth Julia said Amanda would be only hers and that only she should have the right to hold her. Michael could, but only if absolutely necessary. That made no sense to me, especially since my mum never even asked to hold Amanda. In fact, the first time we saw Amanda in real life was just 2 days ago in the hospital. Linda explained that she introduced Julia to some network called the Milk League, where she learned all sorts of negative things about formula and bottle feeding. Linda also said Julia never wanted to vaccinate Amanda, and that my brother had to force her to get the shots. She even recommended that Julia see a few lactation consultants, but it turns out they weren't qualified at all, just some women with Instagram accounts, claiming to be breastfeeding experts. That's everything I know for now. I've pulled together all this information, and what matters most to me is that Amanda is finally safe, surrounded by caring doctors and nurses. I'll share more when I learn it. I feel enormous relief that Amanda is safe, but honestly, I don't think my sister-in-law should ever be near a child again. Update 2. It's been 3 weeks since my last update, and I honestly don't know where to begin. Amanda is thriving. She's gained over 400 grams and the doctors say her kidney and liver functions are returning to normal. She's like a completely different baby now, alert and actually smiling. Michael has been incredible with her, and watching him discover fatherhood properly for the first time has been both heartwarming and heartbreaking. But everything else has imploded in ways I never could have imagined. Julia was released from the psychiatric ward after her evaluation came back inconclusive. No schizophrenia, no severe mental illness, just what they labeled as extreme postpartum anxiety with obsessive tendencies. The social worker assigned to the case seemed to think this was good news. It wasn't. The real bombshell came when Michael was going through Julia's phone, looking for medical records. What he found instead was months of text messages with someone named David. And not just any David, it turns out it was David Richardson, the lactation consultant Julia had been seeing. Except he wasn't really a lactation consultant at all. The messages were disturbing. David had been feeding Julia this whole narrative about how formula companies were trying to poison babies, how only she could truly nourish Amanda, how Michael and our family were threats to her maternal bond. But it got worse. Much worse. The text showed that David had been manipulating Julia for months, telling her she was special and chosen for her dedication to breastfeeding. He'd convinced her that if she could exclusively breastfeed Amanda for 2 years, she'd be worthy of joining some elite group of mothers he supposedly worked with. And then Michael found the photos Julia had been sending David. Pictures of her pumping. Pictures of Amanda feeding. Pictures that no lactation consultant would ever need to see. When Michael confronted Julia about it, she broke down completely. She admitted that David had been visiting the house during the day while Michael was at work. She claimed nothing physical happened, but the emotional affair was undeniable. She said David made her feel like she was finally doing something right, like she was the perfect mother she'd always dreamed of being. But here's what makes my blood boil. When Michael showed the evidence to the social worker, they barely seemed to care. They said it showed Julia was vulnerable and seeking support, not that she'd endangered Amanda while carrying on with some predator masquerading as a medical professional. Michael's lawyer says David Richardson isn't licensed in any capacity. He's been investigated before in 2 other states for similar behavior with new mothers. The police are involved now, but slowly, and meanwhile Julia is demanding supervised visitation with Amanda. The custody hearing is next week. Julia's lawyer is arguing that she was manipulated and deserves another chance. Michael is terrified the judge will believe her. He's been having panic attacks thinking about Amanda being alone with Julia again, even supervised. And then yesterday, Linda called me with news that made everything 10 times worse. She said Julia had reached out to her, asking if she could stay at Linda's place because she couldn't face Michael anymore. But Linda said something in Julia's voice was different, cold, calculating. Julia apparently told Linda that she'd figured out exactly what to say to the judge to get Amanda back, that she'd been researching parental alienation laws and planned to claim Michael had been poisoning Amanda's mind against her. Amanda is 11 weeks old. She can't even hold her head up properly, let alone form opinions about her mother. I don't know what's going to happen at the custody hearing. Part of me hopes Julia gets help and becomes the mother Amanda deserves. But a bigger part of me is terrified that the system will hand Amanda back to someone who nearly killed her, all because Julia knows how to play victim when it suits her. Michael hasn't slept in days. None of us have. We're all just holding our breath, waiting to see if this nightmare is really over or if it's about to get so much worse. Update 3. I wish I had better news, but everything has spiraled completely out of control. The custody hearing was supposed to be straightforward. Michael had all the evidence, Amanda was thriving with him, and even the doctors testified about the severity of her condition when she was hospitalized. But Julia's performance in that courtroom was Oscar-worthy. She walked in wearing this soft pink dress, hair perfectly styled, carrying a folder full of evidence about parental alienation. She cried at all the right moments, claimed Michael had isolated her from Amanda, and somehow convinced the judge that David Richardson was just a support person she'd confided in during her darkest moments. The judge, an older woman who kept nodding sympathetically, granted Julia supervised visitation 3 times a week, 2 hours each session. Michael was devastated. I've never seen him look so defeated walking out of that courthouse. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. 2 days after the hearing, Linda called me in a panic. She said Julia had been staying with her, but something felt really wrong. Julia would disappear for hours without explanation, and when Linda asked where she'd been, Julia would get this strange, secretive smile and say she was preparing for Amanda's return. Then Linda found Julia's laptop open in the guest room. Julia had been researching how to disappear with a baby. Flight schedules to non-extradition countries. How to get a passport for an infant without the father's consent. Legal loopholes for international custody disputes. Linda was terrified and told Julia she had to leave immediately. That same night, Julia showed up at our house at 2 a.m. She was sobbing, begging to see Amanda, claiming she'd changed and just wanted to be a good mother. Michael, exhausted and emotionally drained, actually considered letting her hold Amanda for a few minutes. Thank God I was there to stop him. But Julia wasn't really there for Amanda. While she was crying and pleading with Michael, I noticed her eyes kept darting around the house, memorizing the layout, checking door locks, looking for security cameras we don't have. She was casing the place. The next morning, Michael had his first supervised visitation drop-off. The social worker seemed nice enough, but when Michael came back, he was shaking. He said during the handoff, Julia whispered to him, "You can't watch her forever. I know where you live now." That afternoon, while Michael was at work and I was home with Amanda, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, it was David Richardson. He said he knew I was the one poisoning Michael against Julia and that I needed to back off if I knew what was good for me. His voice was calm, almost casual, which made it 10 times more terrifying. I immediately called the police, but they said since he hadn't made a direct threat, there wasn't much they could do. They suggested I file for a restraining order, but that would take days to process. 2 hours later, Linda called again. She was at the hospital. Someone had broken into her apartment and trashed the guest room where Julia had been staying. But here's the weird part, nothing was stolen. Instead, someone had left photos scattered all over Linda's bed. Photos of Amanda. Photos of our house. Photos of Michael's car in our driveway. The police are treating it as harassment now, but Julia has an alibi. She was at her supervised visitation when Linda's apartment was broken into. David Richardson, of course, claims he was at work and has co-workers who will vouch for him. Michael hasn't slept since Linda's call. He's installed security cameras and deadbolts, and he barely leaves Amanda alone for 5 minutes. Yesterday, he found a note tucked under his windshield wiper that just said, "Soon." I don't know what Julia and David are planning, but I'm terrified it's something that's going to tear our family apart forever. The next supervised visitation is tomorrow, and Michael is considering not showing up, even though it would be contempt of court. Amanda is 4 months old now and completely oblivious to the chaos surrounding her. She's this happy, chubby baby who lights up when she sees Michael, and the thought of her being dragged into whatever twisted game Julia and David are playing makes me sick to my stomach. I keep thinking about what Julia said to Michael, "You can't watch her forever." She's right. And that's what scares me the most. Réessayer Claude Pout faire des erreurs. Assures-vous de vérifier ses réponses. Update 4. I'm writing this from a hotel room at 3 a.m. because our house isn't safe anymore. The last few days have been an absolute nightmare, and I honestly don't know how much more our family can take. The supervised visitation on Thursday started normally enough. Michael dropped Amanda off at the Family Services building, and the social worker seemed her usual cheerful self. But when Michael came back 2 hours later to pick up Amanda, something was very wrong. The social worker, Sarah, looked pale and shaken. She pulled Michael aside and said Julia had spent the entire visit trying to pump breast milk right there in the visitation room, claiming Amanda refused the bottle and needed to be breastfed immediately. When Sarah explained that wasn't how supervised visits worked, Julia became increasingly agitated. But here's the part that made my blood run cold. Julia had brought a diaper bag packed with what she claimed were Amanda's favorite things. When Sarah checked the bag, standard procedure, she found a birth certificate, social security card, and a onesie with Mommy's little traveler printed on it. Julia's explanation? She wanted Amanda to remember who she really belonged to. Sarah immediately called her supervisor, and they decided to suspend future visits pending a full review. Julia exploded, screaming that everyone was conspiring against her, that she was Amanda's mother and no one could keep them apart. Security had to escort her out of the building. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He kept checking the cameras, walking around the house, making sure all the doors were locked. Around midnight, motion sensors triggered on the back patio. When Michael checked the footage, there was a figure in dark clothing testing our sliding door handle. The person knew exactly where the cameras were positioned. They stayed just outside the range, but we could see enough to know someone had been there. Michael called the police, but by the time they arrived, whoever it was had vanished. The officer said it could have been anyone, maybe just a burglar checking for easy targets. But we all knew better. The next morning, Linda called in tears. David Richardson had shown up at her work. Somehow he'd found out where she was employed. He told her coworkers that Linda was involved in parental kidnapping and had helped separate a mother from her child. Linda's boss pulled her into a meeting, demanding explanations. She had to show them the police reports just to keep her job. But then Linda told me something that made everything click into place. While David was harassing her at work, Julia had called Linda's mother, pretending to be a social worker. She told Linda's mom that Linda was under investigation for child endangerment and that the family should distance themselves from her immediately. Linda's mom, panicked and confused, started calling other family members before Linda could explain what was really happening. They weren't just targeting Michael and Amanda, they were systematically destroying everyone who stood in their way. That afternoon, Michael's lawyer called with news that made everything worse. Julia had filed a motion claiming Michael was an unfit father who'd been drugging Amanda to make her unnaturally docile. Her evidence? Photos of Amanda sleeping peacefully in Michael's arms, which Julia claimed showed signs of sedation. It was completely insane, but her lawyer was painting it as concerned maternal instincts. The hearing for her motion was scheduled for Monday, 3 days away. Saturday morning, everything exploded. Michael had taken Amanda to the pediatrician for her routine checkup, and I stayed home to do laundry. Around 10 a.m., the doorbell rang. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, middle-aged, professional-looking, holding a clipboard. I opened the door with the chain still attached, and she introduced herself as Dr. Patricia Wells from Child Protective Services. She said she needed to conduct an emergency wellness check on Amanda based on concerning reports they'd received. My heart sank. I told her Amanda wasn't home, that she was with her father at the doctor. Drive. Wells said that was fine, she just needed to inspect the home environment and ask me some questions about Amanda's care. Something felt wrong, but I was terrified that refusing would make things look worse. I let her in. Dr. Wells spent nearly an hour going through our house, taking photos, asking detailed questions about Amanda's feeding schedule, sleeping arrangements, who had access to the house. She seemed particularly interested in Michael's work schedule and whether he'd ever left Amanda alone with me. After she left, I immediately called Michael to tell him what happened. His voice went completely cold. He said Amanda's pediatrician had never heard of any CPS investigation. Dr. Wells wasn't from CPS at all. We called the real Child Protective Services, and they confirmed no one had been sent to our house. We'd been scammed by someone impersonating a social worker, someone who now had detailed photos of our home, our routines, and our security measures. Michael came home immediately, packed bags for all of us, and we drove straight to this hotel. He's barely spoken since we checked in, just sits by the window watching the parking lot while Amanda sleeps peacefully in her travel crib. The fake Dr. Wells had to be either Julia or someone working with her and David. They're escalating, getting bolder, and I'm terrified about what they're planning next. Michael's lawyer says the impersonation incident actually strengthens our case, but the Monday hearing is still happening. We have to go back to town, back to that courthouse, and face Julia again while knowing she's been inside our house, photographing everything, planning God knows what. I keep looking at Amanda sleeping so peacefully, completely unaware that people who should love her are treating her like a prize to be won rather than a child who needs safety and stability. Michael just got off the phone with hotel security. He's arranged for them to do extra patrols tonight, but we all know that if Julia and David are this determined, a hotel isn't going to stop them. I don't know what Monday's hearing will bring, but I have a terrible feeling that this nightmare is far from over. Update 5. I'm shaking as I write this. The custody hearing was supposed to be our salvation, but it turned into something so much worse than I ever imagined possible. Monday morning, Michael was a wreck. He'd barely slept at the hotel, constantly checking on Amanda, jumping at every sound in the hallway. We arrived at the courthouse early, hoping to get settled before Julia showed up, but she was already there, and she wasn't alone. Sitting beside Julia's lawyer was a woman I'd never seen before, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes, and graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked like someone's favorite aunt, completely non-threatening. Julia introduced her as Dr. Margaret Chen, a child psychologist specializing in parental alienation. What she didn't mention, what we only found out later, was that Dr. Chen wasn't licensed in our state and had her credentials revoked in California for falsifying reports. But it gets so much worse. When the hearing began, Julia's lawyer presented their evidence of Michael's unfitness. The fake Dr. Wells photos were there, but they'd been doctored. Pictures of our perfectly normal nursery had been edited to look cluttered and unsafe. A photo of Amanda's crib showed what appeared to be prescription bottles on the changing table, bottles that had never been in our house. Then Dr. Chen took the stand and delivered this heartbreaking testimony about how Amanda showed clear signs of trauma, bonding with Michael, how the child flinched when Julia's name was mentioned during their evaluation sessions. The problem? Dr. Chen had never actually evaluated Amanda. She'd been working from videos that Julia had secretly recorded during supervised visits, videos that violated court orders. Michael's lawyer tried to object, but the judge seemed mesmerized by Dr. Chen's professional presentation. When Michael took the stand to defend himself, Julia started crying, not the dramatic sobbing from before, but these quiet, heartbroken tears that made her look like a mother desperately fighting for her child. Then came the bombshell. Julia's lawyer called David Richardson to testify. But David didn't present himself as the fake lactation consultant we knew him to be. He walked into that courtroom in a perfectly pressed suit, carrying himself like a medical professional, and introduced himself as Dr. David Richardson, pediatric nutritionist and lactation specialist. He had forged credentials, professional-looking business cards, a fake medical degree hanging in what appeared to be a legitimate office, but we later found out was just a rented space he'd decorated for photos. David testified that he'd been consulting on Amanda's case for months, that Michael had been systematically undermining Julia's attempts to establish proper feeding routines. He presented charts showing Amanda's failure to thrive under Michael's care, charts that were completely fabricated. But here's what made my stomach drop. David knew things about Amanda that only someone who'd been watching us closely would know. He mentioned that Amanda had a small birthmark on her left shoulder. He described her sleep patterns with disturbing accuracy. He even knew that she'd started smiling at exactly 8 weeks old. How did he know these details? We found out after the hearing in the most horrifying way possible. The judge granted Julia expanded visitation, 4 hours, 3 times a week, still supervised but now with Dr. Chen as the supervisor instead of the state social worker. Michael walked out of that courtroom looking like someone had punched him in the gut. We drove back to the hotel in silence, Amanda sleeping peacefully in her car seat, completely unaware that her life had just been turned upside down again. That evening, while Michael was giving Amanda a bath, I decided to go through Julia's social media accounts one more time, looking for anything we might have missed. That's when I found her backup Instagram account, one with a different name that I'd never seen before. The photos made me physically sick. There were dozens of pictures of Amanda that I'd never seen Michael post anywhere. Photos of her sleeping in our house. Pictures of her during bath time, even a video of her first smile, moments that should have been private family memories. But it was the timestamps that made everything click into place. These photos weren't from Julia's supervised visits. They were taken in our home, during times when Michael thought he and Amanda were alone. Someone had been inside our house. Multiple times. Taking pictures. Recording videos. And somehow getting them to Julia. I ran to Michael with my phone, showing him the photos. His face went white when he saw a picture of Amanda in her nursery, a photo taken just 2 days ago, while we were supposedly safe at the hotel. That's when Michael noticed something in the background of one photo that made his hands start shaking. On Amanda's changing table, barely visible, was a small device we'd never seen before. Something that looked like a baby monitor, but wasn't one we'd ever bought. We called the police immediately, but they said they couldn't do anything without proof of actual breaking and entering. The photos could have been taken with a telephoto lens, they said. The device might have been something we'd forgotten about. But Michael knew better. He drove to our house that night, against my protests, and searched Amanda's nursery top to bottom. What he found hidden behind her bookshelf made everything crystal clear. 3 tiny cameras, a listening device tucked inside her stuffed elephant, and a small recorder taped under her crib mattress. Our home had been under surveillance for months. Every private moment, every conversation about custody plans, every vulnerable moment with Amanda, it had all been recorded and passed along to Julia and David. The police are finally taking this seriously. They're treating it as stalking and invasion of privacy now, but the damage is already done. Julia knows everything about our routines, our security measures, our plans. And tomorrow is her first expanded visitation with Dr. Chen. Michael is beside himself. He keeps saying he should never have let his guard down, that he should have known they'd find a way to watch us. Amanda is safely sleeping between us in the hotel bed right now, but I keep checking the locks, looking out the window, wondering if somehow they've found us here too. The worst part? Julia's Instagram posts from today show her shopping for baby clothes, picking out toys, looking for all the world like an excited mother preparing for quality time with her daughter. But I know the truth. This isn't about love or motherhood. This is about winning. And Julia and David have just proven they'll break any law, violate any boundary, and destroy any life that stands between them and their twisted victory. Michael's lawyer says the surveillance evidence should be enough to stop the visitation, but the court order is already in place. Unless we can prove imminent danger to Amanda, we have to comply. I don't know how we're going to get through tomorrow. All I know is that the people who nearly killed Amanda once are getting closer to her again, and this time, they've shown they're capable of anything.